A starving alien widow snuck into his kitchen. The human who fed her changed everything. HFY Sci-Fi Audiobook. Rain slammed against the tin roof in bands so heavy it drowned the alleys. Gutters gurgled, lights flickered, and the whole block hunkered down under shutters. But Elias Veyron's kitchen held its own calm. One strip of light beneath the cabinets, a pot of onion and pepper stew simmering slow, bread cooling on a wire rack, everything neat. Everything where it belonged. Until the side door moved. Barely a finger's width, then wider. A shadow slid in. Leora Kyle pressed her back against the door once it closed. Water ran from her hair down her collarbones, dripping, steady to the tiles. The violet slip she wore clung like it wanted to betray her. One strap torn, one thigh bare, her ribs hollow from days of hunger. She stood still, listening, counting steps. 5 to the counter, 5.5 back to escape. Her stomach cramped when the smell of bread hit her. She reached, trembling fingers closing around the loaf. "Use the knife," a man's voice said from the hall. Calm, too calm, close enough to matter. Her hand froze. She turned. Elias filled the doorway, broad shoulders squared, dark shirt and bare feet, trimmed beard, steady eyes. He looked at the puddle under her, the latch behind her, then her hands, not her body. He tilted his chin toward the knife lying straight on the board. "Cut it, otherwise you'll crush the loaf." She clutched the broken strap, kept her, voice level. "What do you want for me to cut it straight?" He stepped into the room, not closer, just enough to reach the pot. He set a towel on the table, lifted the lid. "Sit, eat, that's it." His tone had no hooks. He ladled stew into 2 bowls as if she'd been expected all along. "Chair near the door if it helps." Leora hesitated, watching his hands, steady, no tremor, no hurry. She slid the knife through crust. Steam rose, clean and warm, and her mouth watered so hard it hurt. She took the seat angled toward escape. He placed a bowl in front of her, pushed a spoon with one finger and leaned against the counter to eat standing. No questions about who she was, what she lost, why she was desperate enough to steal. The first spoon burned her tongue. The second went down smoother. Heat spread through her ribs, loosening a knot she'd clenched since morning. He set a glass of water beside her elbow. "Sip or you'll cramp." Her hand shook once. She steadied it against the table's smooth edge. "Payment," she whispered, sliding a coin across the wood. "Keep it." He nudged it back. "Payment is washing the knife and leaving it dry." The storm hammered the roof. Inside, the kitchen held. 2 bowls. 2 people. A silence that wasn't threat. It was room to breathe. The storm pressed heavier against the roof, a constant drum that made the windows quiver. Leora kept her chair angled, body coiled to run if his voice turned sharp or his hand reached wrong. But Elias only ate, leaning a hip against the counter, spoon moving with a soldier's rhythm. Efficient, no scrape, no sound. His silence wasn't absence, it was space, and space was rarer than bread. She forced herself slower. Each spoonful loosened the ache in her belly. When the bowl was half gone, she pulled the coin back from the table, ready to push it again. Elias shook his head once, then set his own bowl down and pointed at the knife. "Wash it, dry it, that's the price." She blinked, startled by the simplicity. "That's it?" "Blades dull if they're left wet." "I don't like dull." His tone was dry, a flicker of humor under the weight of habit. He crossed to the window, checked the latch with a small push, then turned the gas knob off and on. Once, like ritual. When you're done, mop the puddle under your chair. I don't like wet floors either. Her jaw tightened. It felt almost insulting, as if he measured her worth in chores. But her fingers remembered the blade in her hand, how clean the cut had been, how steadiness gave her dignity back. She rose, carried the knife to the sink, rinsed until water ran clear, dried it carefully on the towel, and set it parallel on the board where it had been. She placed it edge inward. That small detail made him glance back and nod once. The mop stood in the corner. She dragged it across the wet tile, pushing water toward the door. At first, the motion made her stomach twist, with humiliation. Then something shifted. The steady pull, the sound of bristles against tile, the way the floor changed from slick to safe. It steadied her more than eating had. This wasn't servitude. It was order. And order made the air less sharp. Elias stood easy but alert, hands loose at his sides, weight balanced. He was watching the door more than her, a habit burned in by years she didn't need to ask about. Soldier, she thought, not by the clothes but by the stance, ready without threat. She finished the floor, leaned the mop back where it belonged. He brushed his palm across the table once, checking for crumbs, then looked at her. Name? Her throat closed for a second, old instinct to lie. But the storm outside was too loud, the room too exact. She said it straight. Leora Kyle. He nodded once. Elias Varen. Third shift, Dock 7. Scout before that. The hall on your right. Spare room. Shower across. Shirt on the bed. Wear it. I'll wash your dress. Her grip tightened on the mop handle. You're not asking for anything else first? I asked. Wash the knife. Mop the floor. Done. His eyes met hers, steady, plain. The rest is your call. The rain hammered, but inside the square of his kitchen the storm lost some of its teeth. The storm weakened to a steady hiss by dawn, a softer rain dripping from the eaves. Pipes ticked as they cooled. Leora stirred under a clean blanket in a room that smelled of soap and pine oil. For a second she forgot where she was. Smooth ceiling, no stains, walls bare but steady. Then her stomach clenched. Comfort could be a trap if it started to feel normal. The door was closed. The latch sat under her palm, solid. She turned it once, testing. Yes, it locked clean from her side. He had shown her that detail, not to trap her but to prove she could own her own lock. She breathed once, steady, then rose. The gray shirt he'd left fit loose, covering more than the torn dress. It smelled faintly of cedar and clean air. The apartment was quiet. Kitchen neat, counters wiped. 2 mugs waited by the kettle. A folded note lay square beside them in tight block letters. Back soon. Walk loop. Bread on rack. Knife is dry. She froze with the note in her hand. He'd left her alone, left food on the table, left the side door latched but not chained. The world outside was washed and empty. She could take the loaf and vanish into the alleys before the block woke. Her whole body leaned toward it, trained by weeks of running before eyes opened. Leave. No trace. Don't risk debt. Her gaze slid to the knife, clean and dry where she had placed it. Her hand went to the counter, the place smooth from years of care. She remembered his words. Payment is washing the knife, leaving it sharp. He had set rules, not chains. The urge to flee shook through her. Then another urge rose stronger. Pay. The debt on the table. Leave the room better than she found it. Test if his words were true or just kindness born of storm and hunger. She tied her wet hair at the nape, moved to the counter. She sliced the bread clean, no crushing. She cracked 2 eggs into the pan, fried them without breaking yolks. She wiped the surface between each step the way she'd watched him do. She set the table for two, straight, even. The front latch clicked. A cooler draft slipped in as Elias stepped through, jacket damp, hair darker from rain. A small paper sack in one hand. His eyes swept the kitchen, caught the pan off flame, the knife washed and set edge inward, the plates on the table. He saw, details first, people second. That told her how his mind kept order. "Morning," he said, voice low from sleep. "You beat me to it." She slid a plate toward him. "You left instructions. I followed them." He set the sack down. "Good. Start." For the first time in months, the air in her chest loosened without breaking. By mid-morning, the rain thinned to a gray drizzle, streets slick and quiet. Elias pulled on his jacket, clipped a badge to his belt, and checked the side latch twice before speaking. "Doc 7 runs third shift manifests. You can walk with me. See it for yourself, no promises." Leora hesitated at the doorway. A dozen voices in her head said, "Don't follow, don't tie yourself to someone else's rules, don't risk being seen." But another voice, sharper, said this was a test, not from him, from herself. If she wanted more than one safe night, she had to step out. She nodded once and pulled the hood low. The sprawl smelled of wet concrete and old diesel. Floodwater ran, shallow along the curb. A maintenance bot hummed past, sweeping leaves from a drain. Elias walked with a pace that spoke of repetition. He had done this route 1,000 times. He gestured as they went. "Corner bodega, clean. Owner calls before he cheats you. Clinic 2 blocks east. Honest but slow. Avoid the bar by the spur after dark. They pick fights for sport." She listened, cataloging, filing away each landmark. Cameras pointed at main roads, not alleys. Men smoking under a canopy looked away when Elias looked back. The block was his map, and now she had pieces of it. Dock 7 rose ahead, a concrete shelf stained by years of salt. Crane arms stood idle, against a low sky. Freight chutes loomed like ribs. The air tasted of oil and cold iron. Workers moved with heads down, voices low. This was not the loud end of the port. This was the counting end. At the gate, Elias signed in. He did not declare her as anything other than guest. He led her past railings to a row of terminals glowing dull green. Screens filled with codes, numbers, dates. "This field is container ID," he explained, voice level. "This is weight. This flag means the crate sat too long in rain. Needs a seal check. If you miss it, cargo spoils, people lose money. Learn the rhythm and you keep the line moving, that's the job." She leaned forward, eyes scanning the symbols. She asked short questions that mattered. How to clear duplicates, how many errors they tolerated before reassignment. Elias answered, direct, no extra words, no test games. A foreman in a stained cap ambled over, thick through the shoulders, soft at the waist. His eyes went to Elias first, then Leora. "New?" "She reads and writes clean," Elias said. "She can shadow. Quiet." "You vouch if she breaks something?" the foreman asked. "I vouch I'll fix it." The foreman grunted, his version of approval. "Sit her 2 hours, end of shift, I'll see what she remembers." Leora's pulse raced. Not a promise. Not yet. But better. A test she could pass with work. She pulled the stool close. Careful, not to touch the screen. For the first time in months, survival felt like it could be earned instead of stolen. The hum of fans filled the manifest bay, a steady backdrop to the clack of keys and shuffle of boots. Leora kept her eyes fixed on the terminal Elias showed her, careful not to touch the controls. She read fast, marking numbers in her mind, following the rhythm of codes and flags as if tracing a song she used to know. Every correction Elias made, he explained short and exact. No lectures, no condescension, just clean facts. Halfway through the shift, a crate ID blinked across the screen. The prefix caught her like a nail through cloth. Ref 7, Refinery Relief. Her breath hitched. 2 years ago, after the collapse, every donation box that left the tents bore that code. She remembered writing them by hand until her fingers cramped. She remembered her husband crushed in twisted metal, her hands dirty with ink and dust while strangers carried what she could not. Her eyes flicked sideways. Elias tapped the ID without pause, flagged the crate for inspection, voice low. Seal. Check, likely water damage. His beard was shorter now, hair even, but his posture, the way his gaze moved first to exits, then to people, struck her like a chord. Memory surfaced. A man in a trimmed beard and soaked jacket had walked into the tent during the storm, cash in hand. He'd lifted boxes meant for 3, carried them himself, and left without giving a name. You were at the relief tents, she whispered under the fan noise. He didn't look at her. One night they needed arms, I had them. You carried the crates, she pressed. He shrugged, still working. Not a big story. It is to the people who couldn't lift them, she said, quieter, but firm. Her chest tightened, not with suspicion, but with the strange pull of realization. He had not woken up kind last night, he had practiced it. Piece by piece, act by act. The foreman passed behind, checked the queue, grunted approval when she answered a code question without stalling. Her hand stayed steady, but inside, something shifted. The man who fed her soup and lent her a shirt wasn't performing mercy. He had been building it, the same way he built order in his kitchen, the same way he logged manifests, small, exact habits that held when everything else fell. The shift bell rang, a dull clang through the bay. The foreman jerked his chin. She can come back. Shadow again. Pays small until she learns. Leora kept her face flat, but a weight loosened in her chest. Not pity, not rescue. Work, earned with her hands. On the walk home, drizzle fell thin over cracked pavement. Elias didn't ask if she'd noticed him in the past. He didn't claim it. He only checked the locks as they passed each shutter. Silent, present. That silence told her more than a speech ever could. The block smelled of wet stone and fried garlic by the time they reached the stairwell. Leora's legs ached from the hours on the stool, but the ache was good, earned, not begged. The building's halls were narrow, walls damp with old paint, pipes ticking overhead. As they climbed, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the second landing. Grant, the landlord. Heavy in the shoulders, hair combed neat, glasses perched low on his nose. He leaned against the railing like he'd been waiting. His eyes slid, from Elias to Leora and back, sharp with habit, not curiosity. You planning to stack beds in there? His tone was flat, but the words carried weight. Everyone in the block knew what it meant. Unofficial tenants, trouble for the lease, noise complaints before they happened. Elias didn't flinch. He set his hand on the railing, calm, balanced. She's on my line, she pays her way. Grent's gaze narrowed. Hybrids bring trouble. People bring trouble, Elias said, voice level. She brings rent and work. You'll see the books on time. The silence stretched, the hum of water pipes filling the gap. Leora kept her chin up, though heat crawled her neck. She had lived under men who used suspicion as a blade, and this smelled the same. One wrong word and she'd be marked before she started. Before Grant could press, a door creaked open. Sila, the laundry neighbor from down the hall, stepped out, with a basket under one arm. She fixed the landlord with a sharp stare. I saw her mop the stair mat yesterday when half your tenants tracked mud in. You want to complain? Complain about the ones who don't lift a finger. Grant's mouth tightened. He looked between them, then at the wet basket cloth, and weighed his odds. Finally he grunted, a sound more of irritation than victory. 3 rules, he said. No extra beds, no late noise, no fights in the hall. Break them, you're both out. Elias gave a single nod. Done. Grant turned and lumbered down the stairs, shoes thudding heavy. The hall fell quiet again. Selah shifted her basket, eyes cutting toward Leora with a glance that wasn't soft but wasn't hostile either. Stitchwork's tidy, she muttered. It wasn't a question. It was a welcome in the language of the block. Leora let out a breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding. Elias unlocked the door, his voice steady as ever. Neighbors speak louder than landlords. Remember that. Inside, the apartment held its shape, the towel folded, the knife still dry. The storm outside had eased, but inside the walls she felt something shift. Acceptance, small but real. The week settled into rhythm. Bread sliced straight in the mornings, manifest by night. Quiet meals at the table with numbers tallied in neat columns. Leora logged her pay in a small notebook. House, savings. She liked the order, how ink steadied. Her nerves. Elias never pressed, only added his own figures beside hers, rent simple, food accounted for, no hidden charges. For the first time since the refinery collapse, her life had a shape, but by the 4th morning the shape cracked. Coffee soured in her stomach, bread turned heavy on her tongue. She pushed the plate away and kept her face neutral, but by the 3rd day the pattern refused to hide. She stood at the sink, glass of water in her hand, and forced the words out flat to keep them from shaking. I'm late. The room narrowed, the table, the window, his face. Elias didn't freeze, didn't joke. He reached forward, turned, the burner off, leaned his hands on the counter. His voice stayed calm, low, the kind of tone that steadied air. All right. Then we plan. Her grip tightened on the glass. What if I can't work the line? What if Jorik? Then we talk to him, Elias cut in, matter of fact. He respects competence. He's got 3 kids and a wife who ran 3rd shift pregnant twice. He won't throw you out for needing a cooler desk. Doc 7 isn't kind, but it isn't heartless either. His certainty made her chest ache, not with relief but with the fear of believing. What if it's real? She whispered. Then we decide, he said. He pulled the small med box from the cupboard, checked the dates on packets like a habit. First step, get a test. We don't guess, we plan. The clinic smelled of damp coats and disinfectant. The nurse scanned her token, handed her a sealed packet without fuss. Elias sat in a chair by the door, not hovering, not turning away. Present. She took the packet into the small stall alone. She stood a long minute staring at it, because her body moving without her permission for weeks made the ground tilt. Then she did the steps, clean and quick, and returned to wait. The silence stretched. She forced herself to ask, what do you want if it's positive? His eyes met hers, steady. I want to raise a child with you in a house that holds steady. I'll carry more weight at the dock. I'll split shifts if I have to. I'll build what's needed. I will not leave. The words hit harder than comfort. They sounded like vows written in ledger ink. The strip turned, line sharp and undeniable. 8 weeks. Her throat closed. She placed it between them without theatrics. Elias glanced at her face first, then the strip. His jaw set not with fear but with resolve. He covered her hand, nodded once. All right. For the first time since she slipped through his door, Leora let herself believe there could be a future measured in more than storms. The news sat between them like a new wall, but not a heavy one. Elias didn't press, didn't celebrate. He only adjusted, as if planning around storms and babies carried the same logic. Within 2 days, scraps of wood leaned against the wall, sanded smooth, stacked neat. "Doc throws plenty of crate slats," he said simply, setting a saw on the Yao counter. "We'll make them hold." Leora spread fabric across her lap, needle flashing under the lamp. She worked with old thread and steady fingers, sewing edges tight, reinforcing corners. The cloth would line the crib once the frame was ready. She didn't call it nesting, she called it preparation, and that word fit. They built without music, without fanfare. Elias measured twice before each cut, marked lines with chalk, worked the saw slow and exact. Sawdust settled on the counter like flour. He sanded corners until the grain felt smooth beneath his palm. Leora stitched as he worked, the rhythm of the thread pulling through cloth answering the rasp of the wood. 2 different tasks weaving into one. Now and then, they spoke logistics. "Clinic moved me to the cooler queue," she said, not looking up. "Less fumes." "Good," Elias replied, planing an edge. "I'll take heavier crates. Easiest way to balance it." "Name?" she asked once, testing the thought aloud. "Ren," he said without hesitation. Short, clean, easy in both tongues. The quiet carried more weight than any celebration. In silence they built. When evening came, the frame stood upright, railings fixed, joints tightened. Not perfect, but strong. She spread the cloth she'd stitched across it, smoothing it with her palm. The sight pulled something sharp in her chest. Fear, yes, but also steadiness. A place waiting for someone not yet here. Later, while the crib dried near the heater, she leaned against the wall, thread still clinging to her fingers. Elias wiped sawdust from his hands and set the good knife back in its place. He moved with the same precision as always, but when he passed her, she caught his sleeve. He stopped, turned, eyes steady. She didn't frame it in pretty words. "I want you tonight," she said direct. His jaw flexed once, but his voice stayed calm. "Then I'll tell you what I like, what I'll do, how I'll stop if you flinch. And I'll tell you mine," she answered. When they came together, it wasn't desperation, wasn't payment. It was 2 people trading truths in low words, steady touches, no theater. The camera of the world would have shown sawdust on the floor, a candle burning low, 2 hands gripping each other like they were finally choosing, not just surviving. When dawn came, the crib stood ready, and so did they. The night the labor came. The city was drowned in silence. No rain, no wind, just the heavy stillness that often broke into storms without warning. Leora stood at the sink when it struck, a band of pressure across her back so sharp it stole her breath. She gripped the counter, water still running, and whispered, "It's time." Elias didn't rush. He turned the burner off, closed the blinds, and called the midwife with a voice that didn't waver. He set towels at the end of the bed, checked the latch twice, put the kettle on for hot water. Every motion exact, rehearsed in his bones. She paced the hall, one hand on the wall, the other braced at her side. When the pain grew too strong, he was there. An arm offered but never forced. When a contraction clenched her body, he set his forehead to hers, counted down in a low voice. He never said easy lies, just numbers, steady and solid, something to grip besides fear. The midwife arrived with a worn bag and clean hands. The hours stretched, walls echoing with the rhythm of Leora's breath, the weight of her curses, the guttural silence of her effort. Elias stayed close, one hand braced on the rail, the other under her head when she nearly buckled. She spat anger at him once, raw, sharp, and then sobbed apology between waves. He shook his head, whispered, Save your breath, I'm here. At the hardest point, the silence broke into a cry, thin, fierce, alive. The midwife caught the small, slippery body, laid it on Leora's chest. Blue skin glistened wet. A shock of dark hair plastered to the head. Tiny fists clenched with impossible strength. Leora sagged back, chest heaving. Tears ran hot down her temples, but her hands, steady now, curved around the newborn. Elias pressed his forehead to hers again, not with command, but reverence. His voice cracked, low and raw. You did it. They named her Wren. Short, clean, a word that fit on both their tongues. The midwife checked vitals, left quiet instructions scribbled neat on a card. Feed by demand. Walk when able. Call if fever or heavy bleed. Elias paid her in full, refused her attempt to return change. You kept us steady, he said. Take it. The house shifted after that. The crib took the corner near the window. The fan moved to the doorway. Nights broke into small hours of feeding, soft cries, the shuffle of Elias's boots as he walked Wren down the hall in a sling beneath his jacket. Leora showered at 3 a.m., leaned on steam to steady her bones, and found Elias at the table with a manifest propped open, Wren asleep on his forearm, pencil trapped in his fingers. The city outside didn't pause, but inside the square meter, time bent, order held, a child breathed. And for the first time in years, Leora didn't feel like she was bracing for the next loss. She felt like she was building something meant to stay. Weeks blurred into a pattern of new life. Wren's cries marked the hours more faithfully than any clock, and both Elias and Leora bent their lives around her, never perfectly, but steady enough. The budget notebook filled with tighter columns, notes in both their hands. A jar of rice from the bodega sat on the counter, a stack of cloths from Sila on the mat, screws for the crib feet from a man upstairs. The block had accepted them, not with words but with small offerings, the kind of welcome that lasted longer than ceremony. One late evening, Elias returned from second shift, shoulders tired, hands nicked by a snapped crate strap. He set his boots by the wall, heel to heel, but missed by an inch. He tried to hide the miss. Leora caught it, stepped forward, tapped the heels into place with one quick knock. She kissed his jaw and whispered, "My turn to watch." She sent him to the shower, fed Wren, and left porridge under a towel on the table. When he came back, the numbers he feared most, the gas line, the rent, were already marked paid in the notebook. He sat down, ate, and felt something he hadn't since the war. Balance, not rescue. 2 weeks later, rain came again, harder than before. The roof hammered, gutters howled, alleys swelled. Leora stood at the window, Wren warm against her shoulder, watching crates float down the flooded street. She felt her chest tighten, the old instinct to bar the door, to hide. Behind her, Elias checked latches, set towels by the threshold, struck a match for the old candle that had burned the first night she entered. Its flame lit the table steady against the storm's push. He turned, eyes on her. "Do you still want the side door unlatched when it rains?" His tone was not casual. It was a question heavy with choice. Leora tightened her hold on Wren, remembered, hunger burning her throat, remembered slipping through that very door expecting only theft and escape. She thought of soup steam rising, of a knife washed and left sharp, of a mop against wet tile, of a crib built by hand. She thought of how her life had shifted from surviving storm to choosing order. "Yes," she said at last, voice clear. "Someone else will need a chair and a bowl. We can afford the towel on the floor." Elias nodded once, no smile but something softer in his eyes. He set his hand over hers on the table, warm and firm. The candle flame wavered, then held, Outside, the storm raged, streets filled and shutters slammed closed. But inside, their square meter held steady. 2 mugs by the kettle, a crib steady on its rubber feet, a notebook with clean lines, and a door unlatched against the storm. Not weakness, not risk. A rule they chose together. This house makes room, even when the rain comes.